I recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also join my colleagues, Mr. Dunn, in expressing my heartfelt sympathies and condolences for the loss of your son. Sheriff Daniels, thank you for your service to your community and to our country. And again, Judge Samaniego, I'm so grateful for your compassionate and strategic leadership and your partnership with the federal government. Really appreciate your testimony here as well. You know, for anyone who really, truly wants to understand what's happening at the border and to depoliticize this, we've got to take a step back and acknowledge that what we have been seeing is an historic refugee crisis impacting our Western Hemisphere. And it started in 2014 as we began seeing record numbers of unaccompanied minors, and it has continued through the years. When folks credit Donald Trump for limiting migration, I want you to look at what the data shows, which is the only time we saw a drop during the Trump administration was in the weeks after the country and the world shut down because of COVID. And the apprehensions began increasing again before the November general election in 2020. So let's operate in truth and facts, or we won't be able to achieve any solutions together. And I'll tell you, there's no one who wants a safe, secure, well-managed border than those of us who live and work on the border, than those of us who raise our children on the border, those of us who have pledged our service to the border. So to my Republican colleagues, I will work with anyone who wants to achieve what I hope we all want to achieve. And so how do we do that? How do we solve this challenge? I'll tell you how we don't do it. We don't keep doing more and more of the same. The definition of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is insanity. What have we been doing for decades in America? We've been addressing immigration as a border-only issue, and that is an expensive failure. So how do we solve this? Number one, Congress needs to open up legal pathways. We haven't done that in decades. For many of these migrants, there is no line for them to get into. There's no right way for them to use, except for asylum, which is legal. We should also recognize that our country needs immigrants. I don't know about you all, but every CEO I talk to says we need a labor force. I have had CEOs from different parts of the country tell me, can we have some of those asylum seekers in our community? Because we can't get anybody to go to work. So we need to recognize how advantageous immigration is for America. We also need to modernize our processing and include a federal civilian workforce so that, Judge, you don't have to step in and fill in where the federal government has failed. Most importantly, we can depoliticize this work and work for real solutions. So if we want to end the scourge of fentanyl, I sure wish my Republican colleagues would have voted for the bipartisan infrastructure law, which funds technology at our ports. If you want to help defeat the cartels, fund the president's budget as he applies historic resources to do this. If you want to erode the power of the cartels, advocate to end Title 42. And if you want to secure the border, I sure wish you would have voted for historic funding for the Department of Homeland Security in December. But every member of the Republican Party, every colleague actually on this panel who is a Republican voted against that funding. And in fact, in December, President Biden asked for $5 billion for the Department of Homeland Security. Republicans cut that in half and then voted against it. Judge, in that funding was money for communities like ours, for governments like yours that help partner with us. If the Republicans would have had their way, and if that funding wouldn't have made it to you to help, who or what agency would have been hurt the most?
Oh my goodness, just the fact of not having the funding, obviously everybody gets hurt because now NGOs have to step in without any money. Everything gets shifted away from what they need to do. I can tell you FEMA helping us really took that was such an incredible opportunity for us to be able to shelter, to process, to do the things that we wanted to do in a very organized manner.
And when you can't help, what agency has to pick up the burden? What federal
Well-
law enforcement agency?
Well, the Border Patrol.
That's
Border
right.
Patrol. They feel, that's why we have such a great relationship, because they know that if we weren't doing our job with the community, they would have to have, there's 1,200, they have 1,200 beds available. Sometimes they got as much as 5,500. When we help them, the flow comes through, they're feeling good about it, and we take all that pressure away from the federal government.
Thank you, Judge. My time has expired. I yield back.
Right now. Before we go to our next interlocutor, I guess, do any of you need like a 5 or 10 minute break? We do. Okay, so we're going to recess for 10 minutes, or the sound of the gavel. We're in recess.
The committee will come to order. The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Bentz, is recognized for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me just start with Sheriff Daniels. And Sheriff, I'm interested in knowing about how you would view a system that did not allow asylum claims. If we decide to secure the border completely and cut off asylum claims and cut off parole claims, that doesn't mean necessarily that the border is going to be secure. There's still going to be issues because the border is a long space and folks will be coming across it. The reason I bring up this reference to asylum and parole is because when Secretary Mayorkas appeared before us, he assured us that the border was secure and that the law was being enforced. But of course, he neglected to point out that literally tens of thousands of people were being allowed in under the guise of both of those perfectly legal devices. So 2 questions to you. First, I was looking at your suggestions on what we needed to do to perhaps secure the border. So the first question is, which one's the most important if we're actually going to do it? And the second one, in the same vein, is can we do it? Do you think that we can actually secure the border? And if so, tell us how much money it's going to take. And I saw your list. I have no idea what the cost would be. But can we actually secure the border?
I do believe, Congressman, that we can secure the border to a manageable state. We've seen it done before. I've seen it over my almost 4 decades of law enforcement where we have a manageable border. It'll never be perfect. I've seen that. I don't ever see a perfection on the border. But what I do see is having the right programs, which starts with the President of the United States. I know it was mentioned before, different presidents, different ideologies, but the bottom line is when we have a president that, A, prioritizes all our borders, not just our southern border, and then we enforce the rule of law. We can always polish the rule of law, but we have to enforce the rule of law.
Let's stop there.
Okay.
And that takes me nicely to asylum and parole. Those are the laws. Are you suggesting we do away with those and say the border is now closed? We don't want anybody coming across. Is that what you're suggesting? Because I can't let you get away with that polish the rule of law without talking about asylum and parole.
Congressman, when I say, I always put border security first and then immigration second, because we can talk immigration all day, but the border's not secure. We're going to be fighting ourselves like we are in this meeting today. So when I talk about asylum, I believe in asylum, but you got to do it legally. You got to go through a port of entry as designated by our rule of law. You can't come across our border illegally and then have no consequences. That's where I've been a cop for 38 years. I've been in the military. I support the rule of law. I'm never going to change from that. I've done that for so long. And so we got to have rules that we're going to follow, not that we make them subjective to what political ideology fits. We have to have a rule that fits. And that's why I say we have to enforce the rule of law, or we change it to make it fit current times.
Correct. And with mass migration, that's a real challenge. Mr. Dunn, I'm really, really sorry for your loss. And I had some of the staff ask you during break if there was a way of testing for fentanyl so that children such as your son could have some means where they could check to see if that which they are taking has been contaminated with fentanyl. I understand that there may be a way to do it, but it's designated as drug paraphernalia and thus not available. Tell us what the future is when it comes to trying to warn kids who are taking these kinds of things of the danger.
There are fentanyl test strips that are available. Right now, they are classified as drug paraphernalia. Excuse me. And one of the things that we're working on, along with other families that we talk with in Texas, and as well as multiple of our Democratic state representatives, our current representative is a Democrat, is to have these removed from that classification. Governor Abbott has already stated that he will sign any legislation that decriminalizes fentanyl test strips. They just have to get that legislation out there so it can be enacted.
Yeah, so why would anybody object?
They won't. Everybody that we've talked to is on board with it. It's just our session in Texas doesn't meet as frequently, so they have to. We've been told it is one of the priorities, but I believe there's several different bills out there, so I think it's finally just getting everybody on board and getting it done is what we're waiting on. I think our session just convened a few weeks ago, and that is one of the top priorities from the representatives that we've spoken to.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I yield back.
Thank you.
From North Carolina, Ms. Ross is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, Mr. Dunn, and to your wife, I am just so profoundly sorry for your loss. I've met with the families of folks who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. It's a problem in my home state of North Carolina. I think it's quadrupled the problem. And so I am 100% with you in finding a way to stop this drug from coming into our country and spreading throughout the country. And so please, please know that. I'm just somewhat saddened by this hearing because we have had the opportunity to work on bipartisan immigration reform, both immigration reform that deals with the safety and security of our border and that addresses the needs of our workforce. I represent North Carolina, and so we have a huge agriculture industry that is dependent on migrant farm workers. We also have a lot of people in our state who come to work in high-tech companies and in biopharma, and they are having difficulty with their visas and extending their stays. And it really is incumbent on all of us to work together to solve this problem. We're seeing some glimmers of hope on the Senate side, but my great fear is that we're going to have one-sided hearings on the House side that don't bring people together to be able to both solve the situation at the border, which is both a humanitarian and a safety issue, and make sure that we have the workforce that we need. And as I said, in my state of North Carolina, that workforce comes from all corners of the world, but has insecurity about whether or not they're going to be able to stay and whether or not their children are going to be able to stay. And so it's my hope that the majority on this committee really wants to do that hard work. I know that Congresswoman Lofgren is not here right now, but the work that she did on farm worker modernization was bipartisan and important, and helped with border issues, and helped with making sure we had enough farm workers. I worked last session in a bipartisan way to help the documented dreamers. And these are young people who come here legally with their parents on a visa. But because our immigration system is so broken, they have to self-deport at age 21. And we have bipartisan sponsors on the House and Senate side. It got through the House, and we're really, really hoping to work on that. And so it's in that spirit that I would both ask my colleagues to work on this issue, and I will be asking some questions of our witnesses. And my first question is for our judge. Please tell me how to appropriately pronounce your name. Samaniego. So as I've said, immigration has become such a partisan issue. And what I'd like to know from you are what are things that work where you think we can get some bipartisan support at the border?
And I'm glad you're saying that, Congresswoman, because we gain a lot of traction and things seem to be moving in the right direction. And then when politics enters, it sort of distracts us from doing what we need to do. Mm-hmm. But I think you would think at this point that, necessity would give us the way towards getting job creations. And, we hear a lot about that. And I ask two questions from every migrant, every person I meet. And that's one, how long have you been traveling? Just to get them to sympathize with what's happening with them. And then secondly, what is it that you did in your country? And I can tell you, plumbers, teachers, bricklayers, agriculture. I mean, everyone has, there's no one that has said, I'm just a laborer, they've worked in farms, they've worked in doing things that we need. And so if you connect the two, that we have a tremendous need. I know just in El Paso, right there on the border, we have maybe 20%, that we could use 20%, especially in the service industries and the entertainment industries. And they have all of that talents and the abilities. And I think the first thing is, instead of trying to eat the elephant in one sitting, that we start saying, what are some of the small things that we could do? And I believe from just my experience that job creation and connecting the immigration situation to jobs, we've already lived through the Bracero situation that, that we needed, and we used it properly, and it was very successful. So I think the first thing is that I hear is ready to work, and if we could connect it with our needs here in our country.
Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Judge, why wasn't it fixed last year?
Pardon me?
Why wasn't it fixed last year? I mean, the gentlelady talked about working in a bipartisan fashion to fix this problem. Why wasn't it fixed last year?
Why wasn't it fixed last year?
You talked about the concerns and how we have to work together to fix it. I'm just wondering, why wasn't it fixed last year? Because they didn't need bipartisan support last year. Last Congress, they controlled everything in the federal government. If it's a federal government solution, why didn't they fix it?
Well, one of the things that we're doing today, and I appreciate that, is we're having a dialogue, and those dialogues.
I'm all for
can lead
dialogue.
to-
I'm all for working together, but they didn't. Now it's all bipartisan. They had first of all, they say there's no problem on the border's secure. Then they come in here and say, oh, no, we got to work in a bipartisan way to fix it now that we're in control of the House of Representatives. But all I'm saying is last Congress, they controlled everything. Joe Biden's a Democrat in the White House. The Senate was controlled by the Democrats, and the House was controlled by the Democrats. Why didn't they fix it then?
I think that falls more in your corner than mine.
My corner?
Yes, because
In the minority last Congress?
well, all we do is maintain the flow and try to do the best we can with a broken system.
and we
but we
have-
have nothing to do with fixing the system. And so
But you
this-
understand how the United States government works, right? You get a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, they pass something, it goes to the president, he signs it. They could have done that last Congress, they didn't.
Well, what a great
Why not?
what a great opportunity for you.
Great
to be
opportunity.
different.
And that's why we're having the hearing.
Yeah. Exactly.
So they criticized us on the hearing. They said, why are we starting this Congress off with this hearing? So they can't have it every way, and they can't blame Republicans when they were in control. And you can come here and you can say, oh, no, now it's time for bipartisanship. We welcome that. If we really want to address the problem that caused Mr. and Mrs. Dunn to lose their son, the problem that Sheriff has talked to us about that has been so dramatically changed in the last couple years, That's what we want to address. I yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman for his remarks. And I'm just going to follow up, Judge, with the question of well, you and I came to agreement about the numbers of 55,000 roughly that had been encountered in December in the El Paso sector. Some 200 and I can't remember the exact number. I'm sorry, 145 or 50,000 encountered over the fiscal year, the 3 months. How many of those encountered have been turned away under Title 42?
Have been what?
How many of those have been turned away under Title 42 with respect to the?
I'm not sure of that number, but that's, I think from the Border Patrol, they're looking at about 35%.
Yeah, that tracks with the numbers that I understand, right? So you're talking about of the 55,000, you'd have 18 to 20,000 that would have been turned away under Title 42. You have you'd have about 50,000 of those 150,000 would have been turned away under Title 42. Yet we know that there was a situation in El Paso with the difficulty of dealing with the processing of the numbers. We've got busing going on across the country. Like, what happens if Title 42 is no longer being enforced?
Well, I think you're doing the right thing because, as you know, it was a public health mandate. It had nothing to do with migration. And I think if you want to figure out and get to the problem, that was very confusing because it had to do with something totally different that is now being utilized. I think to me, I think the reason we would lift it is because we can continue the process and do it properly. And you're not going to have all of these other individuals that are trying to cross illegally because that's their only way to get here. Because I've said over and over that there's a lot of them that have been stuck in the middle, that they came thinking that Title 42 was going to be lifted. And when it wasn't lifted, then they fell into this desperation. And that's, I believe, and I've said it over and over, that if we
So
take
Judge, and I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. I don't want to, we just have limits on time.
No, go ahead.
I would say to you that what you just described is all in the context of border security. It's all in the context of who comes in and who doesn't, right? Which is what border security is. So there have been some who have been critical of saying that we should enforce our existing laws with respect to asylum laws which require detention. That's what our current laws require, detention while you make a determination, right? A determination of credible fear for persecution under our asylum laws, which is a smaller number than the number of people who are coming that would qualify. And so we're saying we should detain in order to make those determinations. The connection to Title 42 is really important because the current administration is, even in all of its bluster about Title 42, still defending the law in court because they know what happens when Title 42 goes away. And what you just described is really important for the American people to understand. You just described it in the context of border security, not the context of COVID and a pandemic, because it has been being used as a border security Band-Aid. And what we must do as a body is embrace policy changes to ensure we can effectuate management of the flow while respecting our laws with respect to asylum, which is precisely what House Republicans are putting forward, notwithstanding the allegations of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I'm over my time. I yield back.